Wes Thuhal min Freund and welcome to yet another video. In the times full of negativity, it is important from time to time to look at something beautiful, to just bask in aesthetics and enjoy and appreciate what's beautiful about fantasy films, especially then about the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson, my dear friends. And people might have a lot of problems with these films, but we are not here because of this today. We are not here to criticize. We are not here to point out changes that we don't like in this adaptation. No, we are here to purely look at the beauty of the film, and nobody can complain about how beautiful the weapons looked in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Masterfully crafted. All the weapons and the armor, the weaponry, the replicas, the props made by Weta Workshop more than 20 years ago and still hold up today. People recognize the weapons because they have already become iconic, and I am here as a collector of movie replicas and memorabilia to provide you with my top 10 weapons from not only the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but also from the Hobbit trilogy, because even the Hobbit trilogy contained glorious weapons that I would like to have. I'd like to have all of them. I have some of them. I don't have all of them, but it is my goal as a collector to acquire all the replicas and have my own Lord of the Rings weaponry. Alright, my friends, shall we start? I will start with number 10 and go slowly towards number 1, and I think that you can already guess what number 1 will be. Number 10 then, and before I start, my dear friends, I shall like to say one more thing. I am not here to talk about the fictitious history of those weapons. I am not here to talk about the smiths who created those weapons and where they were created, who wielded them in the stories, and so on and so forth. I'm just a collector who likes to look at beautiful weapons. So the number 10, my dear friends, is Orchrist, the sword of Thorin Oakenshield, of course. I said I wouldn't point out the history, but a blade made in Gondolin, which was found by Thorin and company and Gandalf in the Cave of the Trolls, and retrieved them and took them on their adventure. Now, I appreciate, this will be repeated throughout this video, that each and every sword coming from a different race from Middle-earth, they have their specific look, their specific design, which point to that specific peoples or race that it was created by, and that I appreciate the care and the time and the attention that the filmmakers and the Weta Workshop and the designers put into these weapons, so that immediately and instantly it is recognizable whether it is an elvish blade or a man-made blade or a dwarven weapon. Now, I love the fact that most of the elvish blades and swords in the Lord of the Rings trilogy are curved, and a lot of them have just one side that is the sharp blade. And that's the case with Orchrist here. Now, it seems as if the handle was made of a dragon tooth or a similar thing like that, and it is broader, much broader than any other elvish sword that we can see in the trilogy made by Peter Jackson, or both trilogies, actually. Number 2, once again, an elvish blade, or elvish blades, shall we say, the knives or the daggers of Legolas. This is a picture from The Hobbit, obviously, but these blades are glorious. Look at them. Once again, they are curved. They have just one sharp side, one edge, and the symbols there resembling leaves are beautifully engraved in both the blade and the handles. And even though Legolas, of course, preferred to use his bow in battles, there were a couple of scenes in the films in which he made use of these knives, and I just can't wait to get them as well and put them on my wall. Number 8, so that was 10, 9, 8 is the Sword of Boromir, one of the chunkiest swords in the trilogy. Now, of course, even in the books it was described that Boromir was more stocky and a little bit shorter than Aragorn when Tolkien was comparing them, so it is only understandable that their weapons would reflect that. I love the crossguard there, which looks as if it was twisted when the metal was still hot. It's really a piece, like a chunk of metal, a chunk of sword, which Boromir, he made use of it a lot, especially when protecting Merry and Pippin in the Fellowship of the Ring. So number 7 would then be Sting, of course, an elvish dagger. One of the instances when it is a double-edged sword or a dagger, really. But when it was wielded by a hobbit, either Bilbo Baggins or Frodo Baggins, of course, it served them as a short sword, shall we say. What is interesting about the difference then between Sting in The Hobbit and the Sting in The Lord of the Rings is that the Sting in The Hobbit did not include the runes, the elvish runes engraved on the blade. So if I had to choose one, I would of course prefer the one from The Lord of the Rings. I do possess this particular sword, and it is a valuable part of my collection. Next, we've got the Sword of Elrond, and then, of course, wielded by Arwen in the films. In the films, yes, my dear friends, in the films, I know. It is very nice to observe that Elrond first used the sword. You have to pay attention in the Battle of the Last Alliance, in the prologue, and then, of course, we can see it in The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, when Arwen was using it when protecting Frodo. I imagine that Glorfindel, if he was in the film, that he would also wield a sword like that. And then we can see Elrond using the sword in the Hobbit films as well, when he was battling the ring wraiths in Dol Guldur. Next one, and we are getting closer and closer to number 1. Oh yes, I absolutely love the Rohirrim. It is my favorite, people, my favorite nation, my favorite culture of both the Lord of the Rings book and the films, because of course they are basically Anglo-Saxons put into Tolkien's secondary world, and I love and appreciate Eowyn's sword, which is very, very similar to the sword of Eomer and Theoden. We will get there, don't worry. I love how they incorporated the fact that the Rohirrim had very, very close relationship with the horses, of course. So there is horse imagery on their swords above the handle that are usually in case of the swords of Eowyn, Eomer, and Theoden, horse heads, and those swords then make use of gold, of the golden color a lot, more wood, and they are shorter than for example, the swords made by elves, which is quite understandable since they were also inspired more or less by the swords wielded by the Anglo-Saxons or other Germanic people. So I appreciate that about the films as well, that they really took care and realized that the Rohirrim were based on Anglo-Saxons, that they made their armor And of course, their villages, their towns like Edoras, and their weapons resemble the archaeological excavations that we have from the Anglo-Saxons. And this sword performed an admirable deed, one of the greatest deeds in the history of Middle-earth, and that is when Eowyn destroyed the Witch King of Angmar using this sword. Now the next sword is you could say that it is non-canonical as far as Tolkien's books go, because it is Aragorn's Strider sword, his ranger sword. Of course, in the books, he had Anduril, or Narsil, really, the shards of Narsil at the very beginning of the book, and then it was reforged when they reached Rivendell. And then throughout the entire trilogy, he bore Narsil. They decided to do it differently in the films, and until he was given the reforged sword by Elrond in The Return of the King, Aragorn had this simple-looking sword, but I love it, especially because of its simplicity. Now, this sword, in my opinion, of all those on the list here, is the closest to real-life practical swords that knights wore at their side and to battles. It is very practical looking, and which is also what I appreciate about each and every single sword from the Lord of the Rings. They might be, in many cases, fantasy-looking swords, but unlike weapons in other fantasy stories, their visual representations, they are really practical, and they look as if they could be used in real-life battles. You know that especially then in, for example, anime, fantasy stories, the swords are not really practical. It's just they're either too big, or they have spikes in places which they shouldn't have because it would hurt the wielder of the weapon more than their opponent. But this sword I have always loved and appreciated because it's so beautifully simple. Alright, the next one is Glamdring, one of the few elvish blades in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies with a straight blade, and it is double-edged. But once again, it's beautiful because it combines the elvish elements and once again simplicity. Just very practically looking sword. I love the pommel, and I love the runes engraved in the sword. And it's just once again one of the swords that I would love to have in my collection. And we are getting to number 2, number 5, yes, my dear friends, and it's Herogrim, the sword of King Theoden. I told you we would get there, and we are there. Now, the second on the list is the sword of King Theoden. And once again, as it was the case with Eowyn's sword, it contains horses above the handle, beautifully engraved in gold. The blade is a bit shorter than all the weapons in the trilogy, but once again, so beautiful. I've always also appreciated that the horse heads above the handle that meet with their noses, that they resemble a heart a little bit. If you look at it, it looks like as if they formed a little heart there. So yeah, once again, this is one of the most beautiful weapons, not only in the Lord of the Rings films, but fantasy films in general, and one of the most beautiful weapons or swords I have ever seen. And number 1, I know you expected it. We all did. This is one of the most popular swords, one of the most beautifully looking swords from the Lord of the Rings trilogy and from fantasy genre in general. And I would say that the most iconic sword from the Lord of the Rings, apart from maybe the Sting. This is Anduril. Oh yes, forged from the shards of Narsil. Before the Lord of the Rings trilogy was made, I think that if you watch the bonus discs, the extra material in the films, they say that there was not, or there had not been, a sword with a hollow pommel in a fantasy film before that. So it is also revolutionary, and that makes it special, that makes it unique, that makes it beautiful. One of the longest swords in the trilogy, and definitely very much royal looking. Now, if you look at the difference between Narsil when it was wielded by Elendil in the prologue, and then the shards of Narsil when it was displayed in Rivendell, and then compare it to Anduril as wielded by Aragorn. Of course, Narsil did not yet contain the runes engraved in the blade and in the handle, and Anduril does. So if I had to choose, I would of course choose Anduril, the one with the runes. It is one of the few collectibles that I still need to get and add to my collection. It is really a holy grail of every fantasy aficionado weapon collector, and I can't wait to get it. Alright, so this was my top The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit swords and weapons. I might make another video focusing on armor or things like that. Alright, my friends, let me know in the comments down below what your favorite sword from the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies are. And once again, try to focus on more beautiful things and positive things, and not criticizing as much as we have been in the last couple of years, because it's really getting old. It is getting old. Alright, and that will be all. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm out of here.